The station orbiting the gas giant was called Horizon Station, a fitting name for a place suspended at the edge of the known universe, teetering between the dark unknown and the endless abyss of deep space. With its gleaming, sterile walls and the hum of machinery, it felt more like an extension of the void than a place of discovery. The crew lived in a routine, one where the cycle of days and nights blurred into a never-ending loop of research, calculations, and the occasional attempt to make small talk with a fellow scientist. Dr. Ethan Morrow, an astrobiologist with an affinity for pondering the meaning of existence between cups of tasteless synthetic coffee, was no stranger to the isolation. He'd grown used to the endless silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the station's structure or the distant ping of the communication network. This was the life he'd chosen after all, or rather, it had chosen him. His days revolved around examining the alien biology of creatures discovered on distant planets, trying to unlock the secrets of life beyond Earth's familiar limits. But even Ethan, with all his knowledge, couldn't have predicted the one thing that would crack the monotony of his existence. It started as any other day, Ethan's shoes squeaking as he shuffled across the sterile halls, carrying a data pad and a half-eaten protein bar. His lab coat fluttered slightly with each step, as if it too was bored of the repetition. He was heading toward the biolab when the door slid open, revealing a sight that momentarily halted his brain's usual function. There, standing in the doorway, was the kind of presence that could make an entire room go still. Lyra. She wasn't like the other aliens he had encountered in his years of space research. Sure, there were the usual bipedal forms, with varying skin tones and even some with tentacles or extra limbs. But Lyra, she was different. Her human-like appearance was striking, almost too familiar, until you noticed the long, tapering ears that peeked from beneath her raven-black hair, a feature so subtly alien it seemed both out of place and perfectly natural. Her skin, a soft shade of ivory, had an ethereal glow, like moonlight catching on a marble statue. And those eyes, his mind stuttered at the thought of them, were vast, endless pools of deep blue that seemed to pull him into a galaxy of their own, shifting in color as if they were reflecting the very stars themselves. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his usual confidence faltering for the first time in years. He had studied countless species, analyzed genetic code that spanned galaxies, yet nothing prepared him for the intensity of her presence. And naturally, like any self-respecting human, his response was, "Wow, your eyes, they're amazing." A simple statement, one he had made countless times when marveling at a particularly striking feature, expecting the usual polite nod, maybe a smile, or even a modest thank you. It was a harmless comment, wasn't it? But instead of the expected social niceties, Lyra didn't blink. In fact, her face remained impassive, her eyes unwavering. Her lips parted slightly as though preparing to speak. But what came next was not what Ethan expected at all. "Strength is what my people value," she said, her voice calm and almost mechanical, as if she had said it 1,000 times before. "Appearance is secondary." Ethan's mind struggled to catch up. It wasn't a rejection. Not exactly, but the bluntness of it was like a slap to the face. He cleared his throat awkwardly, suddenly aware of the fact that he had been staring for far too long, no doubt. He shuffled his feet, attempting to regain his composure. "Well, I mean, sure, yeah, strength is important," he said, the words tumbling out in a somewhat embarrassed rush. "But you know, humans, well, we appreciate beauty too. It's just kind of natural." Lyra didn't seem particularly interested in his floundering response. Instead, she raised an eyebrow slightly, as if considering his words for the first time. Her eyes shifted, the color deepening as if something within her had just shifted. Then almost imperceptibly, she smiled, just the faintest curve of her lips. "I find it curious," she mused, her voice dropping to a soft, contemplative tone, "that your species puts so much value on something as fleeting as appearance. It's almost laughable." Ethan blinked, unsure of whether to laugh or remain mortified. He opted for the latter. I, uh, I wasn't really trying to, make a statement. It was just a compliment," he mumbled, still feeling the weight of her gaze pressing down on him. Lyra's smile, once so elusive, now lingered a little longer. It wasn't a smile of mockery, but more a genuine, yet puzzling reflection, as if she found humans' ways of interacting, both amusing and perplexing. The tension, once thick in the air, began to thin, and a strange warmth settled in its place. Ethan found himself exhaling a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Human humor," she remarked, her voice lightly teasing. "You mask everything with jokes, don't you? Beneath the humor lies something far more complex." Ethan chuckled nervously, unsure if she was being complimentary or simply observing him like some kind of lab specimen. He gave her a half smile, trying to recover his composure. "Well, that's the human condition for you," he replied with a shrug. "We try to make light of things, especially when we're caught off guard. It's like a defense mechanism. Keeps us from, totally freaking out." Lyra's gaze softened, the corners of her mouth tilting upward in amusement. "Interesting," she said quietly. "Perhaps that is strength in its own right. Finding humor even in moments of vulnerability." It was one of those rare moments where the conversation seemed to stretch and bend around them, an unspoken understanding passing between them. There was something profound in the simplicity of their exchange, yet something so human about it too. Ethan found himself both baffled and intrigued by the alien woman before him. Her directness was disarming, and yet her ability to recognize his own vulnerability, however slight, was unnervingly perceptive. "Maybe you're right," he said, scratching the back of his head. "But still, no one ever told me that a compliment about eyes could turn into an existential crisis." Lyra raised her eyebrow again, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Perhaps you should reconsider what makes you uncomfortable, Doctor. Morrow, you never know what might hide beneath it." And with that, she turned and walked away, her long, fluid strides taking her down the hallway. Ethan stood frozen in place for a moment, unsure of what had just happened, or more accurately, unsure of how he was supposed to feel about it. He watched her leave, a strange mixture of awe and confusion lingering in his chest. One thing was certain: he wasn't about to forget the first conversation he had with the alien woman named Lyra, nor the way it made him question everything he thought he knew about connections, strength, and perhaps even what it meant to be truly vulnerable. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a spark of something other than scientific curiosity. It wasn't attraction, not exactly, not in the way he had expected. It was something far more intriguing, something that didn't fit neatly into any category he was used to. Something more human. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, he wondered if perhaps the universe had just handed him something far more profound than he was ready for. The next day, Ethan found himself inexplicably thinking about Lyra, which wasn't all that unusual. It was hard not to think about someone when they had made you feel like your very thoughts had been picked apart, analyzed, and then casually tossed aside. The morning had started with a grim realization that Horizon Station's coffee supply was running low again, and it had only taken him 10 minutes of walking around to remember that the replicators had started to malfunction, meaning he was stuck with whatever stale, pre-packaged caffeine substitute they had left. He had the distinct feeling that his day was not off to the best start, which was only further confirmed when his first call of the day was an accidental butt dial from his assistant, Zoe, who had apparently been in the middle of discussing some kind of botanical experiment with someone on the other side of the galaxy. But that was the life of a scientist on Horizon. Endless disconnections and malfunctions, with a sprinkle of occasional cosmic significance if you were lucky. But none of that mattered now. The real issue was the unexpected shift that had happened inside him since his brief encounter with Lyra. Ethan had always considered himself a man of logic, someone who thrived on structure and predictability. His world was defined by the study of alien organisms, meticulously categorizing them, analyzing their genetic structures, understanding their ecosystems. To him, everything had a system, a reason. But Lyra, she had introduced a certain unpredictability into the equation, and that was what unnerved him. The truth was, Ethan had no idea how to approach her the next time they crossed paths. Should he act like everything was normal? Pretend the last conversation had been a standard exchange? Or was there some deeper meaning to her words that he had yet to uncover? His thoughts spiraled as he walked through the narrow corridors of the station, heading to the biolab. He couldn't seem to escape the odd tug of curiosity, not when his brain kept replaying her words. Strength is what my people value. The bluntness of it had stung, but there had been something else behind it, a quiet sort of wisdom, an insight into a culture that seemed entirely foreign, yet somehow familiar. That's when he saw her again. Lyra was standing by one of the observation windows, gazing out at the gas giant below them. The swirling blue and purple clouds of the planet were mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. He had seen them 100 times, but for some reason, watching her watch them felt like an entirely new experience. She didn't turn to acknowledge him as he approached, but the air seemed to hum with something unspoken. He wondered briefly if she had some sort of radar-like ability to sense his presence even before he reached her. Still fascinated by it, huh? Ethan said with a grin, trying to break the awkwardness that seemed to hang between them. It's pretty, I'll admit, but after a while it starts to feel like looking at the same painting over and over. She didn't respond right away, her eyes never leaving the view. But when she did speak, her voice was soft, thoughtful. Do you ever wonder, she began, her words measured, as though she were considering each one carefully, what it would be like to be as indifferent as the planet, to simply exist without the need for anything else? Ethan blinked, momentarily caught off guard. The question felt weightier than it seemed on the surface. He had expected small talk, maybe a snide comment about his earlier compliment, but this was something else entirely. Something more vulnerable, if that was even possible. I guess, maybe, he said slowly, but I'm not sure I'd want to be that indifferent. Isn't part of being human about wanting more than just existence? Ambition, love, curiosity, all that stuff? She turned her head just enough for their eyes to meet, and in that brief moment, Ethan felt as though she was stripping away every layer of pretense he had built up. Her gaze was still as intense as it had been the first time they locked eyes, but there was something softer there now, something deeper. He couldn't place it, but it made him feel exposed, as if she could see through every mask he'd ever worn. I think, Lyra said, her voice almost too quiet, that your species doesn't understand the true meaning of strength. Ethan felt his stomach tighten, half expecting the conversation to take a familiar turn, to dive back into the realm of alien superiority or some impassive observation about human behavior. But instead, she surprised him again. It's not about power or dominance, she continued. It's about resilience, about being able to carry your burdens without breaking. The world, your world, is built on the idea of conquest, of overcoming weakness. But real strength, true strength, is the ability to endure without that constant need to prove yourself. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't sure whether to agree, argue, or simply shut up and listen. It was as if she had just peeled back some layer of human behavior that he had never considered. Something that had been hiding right beneath the surface. The kind of strength she was talking about wasn't about force. It wasn't about the loud, boisterous battles he had always associated with power. It was quieter, more internal, and maybe, just maybe, he realized, more human. Resilience, he repeated, testing the word on his tongue. It felt strange coming from him. That's, a little different than what I was taught growing up. Lyra glanced at him then, and for the first time, her lips curled into something that wasn't a smile, but wasn't entirely a frown either. It was like a gesture of understanding, of some unspoken acknowledgement that they were both still figuring this out. It's not what you were taught that matters, she said softly. It's what you choose to believe. Ethan chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. You really have a way with words, don't you? I mean, I was hoping for a thank you for the eyes comment, but here I am, questioning my entire worldview. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you should be thankful for that. After all, growth only comes when you question the things you take for granted. Great, Ethan said, shaking his head with mock dismay. Now I'm going to spend the rest of the day thinking about how my whole life has been a series of assumptions waiting to be shattered. I was just trying to have a nice quiet cup of coffee this morning. She didn't laugh. Lyra's sense of humor seemed to operate on a different wavelength, more subtle and dry than most humans could manage. But there was something in her eyes that made Ethan feel like he had said exactly what needed to be said. For all the intellectual barriers between them, there was a strange camaraderie forming. Maybe it wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something else. Something different. Something unspoken, yet powerful. "You think too much," Lyra said, her voice softening, almost teasing. "You'll drive yourself mad if you keep overanalyzing everything." "Guess that's my job," Ethan replied with a shrug. "I'm a scientist. Overthinking is sort of in the job description." "Perhaps," she said, "but sometimes it's better to simply exist and let the universe show you what it wants." Ethan smiled, feeling the faintest flicker of something unfamiliar, something he wasn't entirely ready to name. Maybe it was the beginning of a friendship. Maybe it was the start of something deeper. He didn't know yet, but he wasn't in a hurry to figure it out. For once, he allowed himself to simply be in the moment. "Well," he said, chuckling lightly, "maybe you're right. I'll try to take a break from trying to solve the mysteries of the universe for a while, at least until the next existential crisis hits." Lyra looked at him for a long moment before nodding, as if she understood him in a way that was both reassuring and unnerving at the same time. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel the need to ask any more questions. The answers, it seemed, would come when they were ready. As they stood there in silence, gazing out at the swirling gas clouds, it was clear that whatever was happening between them wasn't something either of them could predict. But perhaps that was part of the allure. Sometimes the most interesting things in the universe weren't the ones you could explain, but the ones that refused to be understood, no matter how hard you tried. And right now, Ethan was beginning to realize Lyra was one of those things. The days that followed were a strange blur for Ethan. He went through the motions of his work, analyzing new samples from the recent expedition to a nearby moon, conducting routine scans of the surrounding stars, and even cataloging yet another new species of plant that smelled faintly of ammonia. But none of it felt quite as important as it once had. Somewhere between his scientific observations and the quiet hum of the station, he had found something else, something he hadn't known he was searching for. It wasn't until the unexpected communication from Earth arrived that Ethan truly realized how far he had come since his first flustered interaction with Lyra. The message came as a standard update from the Horizon Station's administration, filled with bureaucratic nonsense and directives about upcoming space exploration missions. But buried at the end was a brief line from his old colleague back on Earth, asking if he was ready to return home. At first, Ethan felt a pang of anxiety. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Home, Earth, the place he had left behind, the familiar comforts of routine and predictability. But for some reason, the idea of going back didn't sit well with him. He had come to space to escape, to explore, to discover new frontiers. And yet, he realized now, the greatest discovery had been right in front of him all along. Lyra. She had become more than a curious alien specimen. She was something else. Someone who, in her own way, had made him rethink everything he had known about strength, vulnerability, and connection. Their conversations had started with awkwardness and jokes, light-hearted moments that seemed to cover up something deeper. But as time passed, those exchanges grew more meaningful, more personal. They no longer felt like the usual scientific banter between colleagues, but something more, something unspoken but undeniably real. The last time they spoke, they had been standing side by side in the observation deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space. Ethan had asked her, somewhat hesitantly, what her world was like. The question had seemed trivial at the time, yet it had opened a door neither of them had expected to walk through. "It's not much different from here," Lyra had said, her voice carrying the weight of experiences he would never fully understand. "We live, we fight, we endure. But there's always something more, something beyond. The question is, do you keep searching for it?" Ethan hadn't had an answer for her then. But as the days passed, as the hum of the station became more familiar, he began to realize that the question wasn't just hers, it was his too. And that's when he knew he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when there was something he hadn't fully explored. Something that was now as much a part of him as the universe outside the station. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the way she had challenged him to rethink everything he took for granted, or the way she had made him laugh, even in the midst of his deepest uncertainties. Or maybe it was the quiet understanding they had begun to share, as if both of them had been waiting for someone who could look beyond the surface and see the complexities underneath. Either way, Ethan knew that leaving would be like stepping back into a life that no longer fit him. His old world, his life on Earth, felt distant, like a dream he couldn't quite grasp. He had changed in ways he couldn't even fully explain, and the thought of returning to the same old routine seemed impossible. He had learned from Lyra that strength wasn't about what you could conquer, but about what you could endure. And that was a lesson that wasn't just about physical resilience. It was about emotional endurance, too. It was about being able to face the unknown, to live in the uncertainty, and to still have the courage to reach for something more. And so, he made a decision. A quiet one, but a firm one. He wasn't going back to Earth. Not yet, and maybe not ever. His place, his journey was here, in the vast emptiness of space, alongside a woman who had taught him more about life than he ever could have imagined. He sought out Lyra the next morning, a little nervous but determined. She was in the same spot, staring out at the planet below. It had become something of a ritual, one that both of them had silently agreed upon. She turned when he entered, her expression unreadable as always. "I got a message from Earth," he said, his voice a little unsteady. "They want me to come home." Lyra didn't say anything for a moment, but her eyes flickered, just slightly, as if she were processing his words. She wasn't surprised. She never was. But the silence between them was heavy, pregnant with something neither of them was willing to speak just yet. "What did you tell them?" she asked finally. Ethan paused. The question wasn't as simple as it seemed. He could have given her the usual answer, the one that came so easily to him. Just go back, pick up where he left off. But in that moment, he realized how far he had come. He wasn't the same person who had arrived at Horizon Station all those months ago. He wasn't just a scientist anymore. He wasn't just a man trying to escape from something. He had found something, something he hadn't even known he was searching for. "I told them I wasn't ready," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. I think there's still more to discover here. Not just out there," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the infinite space outside the window. "But here, in me, and in you." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. But Ethan saw something there, a flicker of something, perhaps understanding, perhaps approval. He wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. In that moment, he realized that what they shared didn't need to be explained or defined. It just was. "So you'll stay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I'll stay." The tension between them, once so thick, seemed to dissolve, leaving only a quiet understanding. No words were necessary. They both knew what lay ahead. The future was uncertain. Space, after all, had a way of being unpredictable. But for the first time, Ethan felt ready to face whatever it held. He wasn't running from something anymore. He was walking towards something. And for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Lyra gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, as if to lighten the moment, she added, "You know, you might want to reconsider your obsession with the replicator coffee. We have better options." Ethan chuckled, the sound echoing softly in the vast observation room. For the first time in a long while, it was a laugh without any bitterness, without any hesitation. It was just a laugh. And as they both turned to look out at the swirling gas giant, Ethan realized that it wasn't the stars or the planets that made the universe so vast. It was the connections, the small, quiet moments between people that, against all odds, made everything feel just a little bit more like home. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but whatever it was, he knew that he wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time in his life, that was enough.